From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. James, we're in person here.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, this is the first time we actually got to do this podcast in person.
And so James and I met last InfoComm21, and this is InfoComm22. And it's been a great ride for us. We've completed a year of doing Ask the Programmer, and we're able to celebrate it by being here in person together at the Starin booth at InfoComm22. And we're joined by two guests, and we'd like to introduce them, and we have a question on deck to talk about today. So first is Will Dewitt from USC, the manager of learning environments.
Learning environments manager, yeah, same thing.
Welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank y'all.
And also I have honored to introduce Brittany DiCesare, who is from Control Concepts, our account manager.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. So, Will, tell us a little bit about, you've listened to our podcast. Give us a little bit of feedback.
I've been enjoying it. It's really good. I've never been too heavy on the programming side. I'm more customer service, customer experience side. So it's interesting to hear basically the other side of that, the programmers, what you're focused on and what you're really looking for, and basically learning what I don't know that I didn't know so.
Wonderful. Well, one of our missions is to build community amongst programmers, but the second one is to try to lower those barriers so that what we do, although to some seems like magic, still can be understood. And hopefully we're accomplishing that. So what's your question?
Okay, so my question is, I'm wondering the show floor, everyone I talk to just about, it seems like I say, can it do this? I go, well, we've got an API. What is an API? How does it get implemented? How can I help the programmers that I have to work with and tie into it and communicate to them what I need this to actually do?
Very good question, and an important question, and something that's very relevant right now. And Brittany, you work with us and talk to a lot of manufacturers and help to understand that, because a lot of them don't quite understand they have an API. They promote having an API, and they say that this is a big value, but what does it really mean?
Yeah, so you hear we've got an API. Okay, now what? Like, what do you do with it? How is it being used within the industry? How are you making sure it's being used to its fullest, right? Because a lot of times within the field, it's not going to be, I'm just going to go and take and spend 80 hours, 100 hours getting it all set up here for my use case, right? So what do I do with that? Who do we go to? Who do we ask questions to, right?
And James, jump in on this, because this is something that you, I'm sure, in your programming role and also in evaluating products for your university, this is, I'm sure, a conversation that you have often, and having an API is critical, but are we making the most of our API these days?
That's a couple of questions there. One, I was never huge on APIs, and that was my own partake, because especially when I come into programming, I like full control and not fully trust other people's programs. I'm learning to develop more with APIs. But I think really what it is API for manufacturers, I felt, become a buzzword. They don't know what it is. They don't know how to sell it, or especially to people like Will, who is not a programmer. All right, how do I take this back and get my programmers to understand it? Like Steve, you under APIs. I know APIs. I can deal with them, but most of these people walking the floor don't know what APIs are. So is that us programmers doing a bad job at telling our salespeople what APIs are, or is it just a buzzword right now?
So let's take a step back, because we like to define our acronyms, and that's something that I've learned from other podcasts. So an API is an application programming interface. So that hopefully starts to answer the question, right? And one of the things about an API is what are the commands? How does this device talk? What are the functions that can be used, and what are the specific messages that you send to a product in order to evoke those those functions. So that's what's contained in an API. And APIs come in a bunch of different flavors. They can be very straightforward, where you just send a power command, and it may just be simply writing POWR, let's say, and that can be a way that you would turn something on or off, and it can be very simple in that regard. However, APIs have evolved quite a bit because we're in a world now where devices are on a network, and now an API has a lot of different values and importance. And this also is seen in a lot of mainstream applications that we work with. So if we talk about something like Slack or something like if this then that, these are different tools that people use that not only do what they are intended to do, but also talk to other pieces of software or other products. And the way they do that is through an API.
And how difficult are those to write or implement? How much time does it generally take? If I'm going and asking for these time resources from another department to help me develop and implement these APIs, I need to know what I'm asking for. And
So I'll tackle that one, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong here. The way I understand the APIs generally now is they're supposed to save time. So you're sitting there and going, okay, I'm going to write the power module and write this module and write that module. Manufacturer A gives you an API that has all those commands already done. You're just saying, okay, turn on or turn off. And it does all the other commands for you to speed up the process. Correct me if I'm incorrect.
So I think yes, but do you want to jump in? So we're talking about now you take an API, and what you do with it is you write software that implements it. So that comes in the form of what is the other side. So an API is a connector. It allows you to talk to that device, but how are you talking to it? Who is talking to it? And the way you talk to it is through the API. But what's important is what is the product that is talking to the device or the other piece of software, and that middle piece is called middleware. It's a tough name, but so middleware comes in a bunch of different flavors. Middleware comes in modules, drivers. These are all the same thing, but what middleware means is that I have two different pieces of either equipment or software, and something sits in between that's that translator. So in the control system world, you want to press a button and you want to make something happen. You use the API through a piece of middleware to make the device talk in some regard. So the API is basically the formula that you use to be able to get there. Does that help?
it does. And so does it matter if you're going over USB or over IP base, or is it all just kind of the same?
So that's within the API specifications. So sometimes an API would be for RS-232. Sometimes it would be for network communication. It's all specified within. An API can be an extensive document, or it could be one page.
So an API is basically like an instruction list.
It is. It's specific to the device. It's something that's created by the manufacturer. But what it's saying is, I want you to talk to me. Here's how you do it. Mm-hmm. And then that other piece that you said, how do I make an API work? You write software that uses what is specified in the API to then talk to that device.
Okay, so if I'm wandering the show floor and I ask camera manufacturer X, and they say, oh, we've got an API that makes it work with controller Y, what do I need to then have to go to the programmer to give him or to point him in the right direction? Do I need a certain link from them to give him the API, to give him the documents to download?
So
what are they
the
going to be
API
looking
is
for?
universal. So that's one thing just to clarify. So you wouldn't have a specific API for different products. That's the starting point. You might have different middleware for different products because those are specific to the two pieces. but the API is what helps. So yes, it would be a downloadable document. It might be a web page. It can be extensive. It can be very simple.
Okay.
But there are different things to look for within an API. So some of them are very straightforward. Others can involve security. So there's all different ways. So one of my developers explained if you are going to work to connect Netflix to a to a device, you get that little code that you have to put in. That's using security, and it's called OAuth. And you by using that, you're talking to the Netflix API to be able to create a bond between your display or your player and Netflix's service in the cloud.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so this conversation really has opened my eyes, and I think it goes back to what I'm talking about, where it became a buzzword. Because I've always came under the impression, and this is my lack of knowledge, I guess, was API was the middleware. That's what I understood the API as. Because everyone says, hey, we got an API. Well, yeah, I took the driver as what the device, you're talking to the device as. So yeah, I use APIs all the time, but I just called them drivers, not APIs. I always took APIs as the middleware.
Well, and so that's where, you're talking to that manufacturer and they're saying, okay, we have an API. Well, do you have a driver? Do you have a module? Like, what's your middleware? How is my programmer going to get that connected? Right? So that's the other piece, that middle piece is that translator. So yeah, this one's talking French, the other one's talking German. They got to meet somewhere in the middle. So how is the manufacturer ready to help make sure that it's easy to integrate?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm looking for is what's the terminology? What do I need to know? Because it's like having a display. They're like, oh, yeah, you just connect it with a cable. All right, well, what kind of cable? I know cables. I know DVI, HDMI, but modules, drivers, that's where you don't want to sound like, oh, I just don't know what I'm talking about, but I don't, and I need your help.
So by saying that you have an API, just like Brittany was saying, is a good quick answer, because it's going to say, okay, I'm in the game. Because some products don't have an API, and you can't control them. It's just, no, you can't. There's no entry point there. But that's a good starting point, and now an API also has to be validated. So the API may not actually have all of the functions that you're looking to support, and that's also something to go and take a look at, because they don't have to expose everything that a product can do with an API.
Is there an easy way to get an idea of what the API supports?
A programmer. Yeah.
Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So here's another thing, that any type of device that has like a web interface or an app, those are using the API to talk to the device. They're just not telling you. So a lot of times, if that's a good way of saying that I know that I can talk, that I can get the functionality I need if they're using that in an app that they've already developed. So, and sometimes that may not become apparent, because the person that you're talking to may not be able to share that or be unwilling to share that. Mm-hmm. But that's a good way of determining what is supported and what isn't supported.
Okay, yeah.
So let's talk about why. Why are we having this conversation? Why is an API important? Mm-hmm. So in this day, especially in integrated systems, we need to be able to make different devices work within one platform. And that's where we get into modules and drivers. And so I'm sure that you have a specific need when you're looking at a product that you want it to work with something else. Would that be true?
Yeah. I mean, I'm customer-facing, customer support, so my whole focus is making things as easy on the customer as possible. How can we support them better, faster, easier, make their experience better? So anything I can do towards that goal is what I'm moving towards. It doesn't matter what it takes, let's just get there. And so looking at APIs, if it winds up causing more issues than it solves, then it's not worth it. If I wind up having to tie up engineers for hours and hours and hours for 1% gain on function, that's probably not worth it. There's probably something better they could be doing. But I need to know what I'm asking for before I ask it of them, so that I don't waste their time, they don't waste the user's time, like just to make everything smoother.
Could you give an example maybe of something that you might be, you don't have to use brands, but is there some situation that you're trying to find a solution for?
Everything? No. Let's take classrooms for example.
Sure.
Teacher walks into a classroom, they want it to work. So we've got projectors, we've got computers, we've got document cameras, we've got screens, we've got sometimes blinds, light, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
All that has to be tied together into an API. Well, if I get this new shiny toy and I want to bring it into that control system software, I have to get them to integrate it in so that the teacher can control it more easily. Some things are easy to do, they just plug and play. Some things you need an API. And so how to tie all that in is really kind of what we're looking at, if that makes any sense.
So that's where what Brittany was saying earlier. That's where the having those modules or drivers. So what that's doing is it's taking an API and making it even more powerful by saying, I have the API and I've gone one step further to now bring it into the environment that you're looking to work with. So if you're working with a particular control system, you want to be able to say, do I have something that readily works for your product? And that's what they call a module or a driver. Some plug-in is another term for it.
Yeah. So you've got that teacher, they're coming in and they have a checklist of 20 things they got to turn on and power on and get set and write inputs and everything. That's not going to work. That's way too difficult. So you get everything into that control system. You have those modules, those plugins, they're already all feeding in, all connecting and talking. So teacher comes in, plugs in computer, button, ready to go. Now we're going. Now we're teaching. Now their time is not wasted on this 20-step checklist. They're there and ready to use it, and they're off teaching, doing what matters, right?
So the other thing we could touch on too, and James, if you want to comment on this a little bit, is that in a programming environment, using an API, somebody who knows what they're doing and has the skills can very much go and implement it if they understand it. But then we also have configuration solutions. So that's where an API is only half of the solution, because the configuration platforms don't necessarily have the ability to do the custom programming that is required for somebody to talk to a device if it's not already in the library.
Yeah, going with what Steve was saying, the whole customization with the non-custom, the configuring using that is going to be limited because you can't. To get the full power of the API, you got to customize it, because other than that, you're going to bloat your middleware to try to handle every situation, and then that becomes heavy on your system. They bogs them down. So I agree. I think you got to have that balance.
So where's the difference come in between a configuration file, a settings file, and an API, or are they all similar flavors of the same thing?
So it depends on what. That's a very good question. So it depends.
That's why
on,
I invited him.
It depends on what you're looking to accomplish, and it depends on the approach that you're looking to take. So we've had shows before where we've talked about the difference between programming and configuration, and programming is like using a blank canvas and you can paint any type of picture you want, whereas configuration is more of like paint by numbers. So you only have a certain amount of colors and you only have certain options to make that happen. And if you want to paint outside of that form of that, or that stencil, let's call it, you have to, you're either limited here or you have to go into use a different approach. And part of what that's where modules and drivers get really critical, because those are what allow you to make the puzzle work. You don't have the free-form capability of programming in a configuration. So configuration, the advantages of it are that it's quick and easy. You don't have to have as much technical experience, but you also don't get the same flexibility as you would in a programming environment.
Okay, so this may sound like I'm asking you how to eat an elephant, but let's say I wanted to learn how to implement APIs. How would I start?
So it depends on where you're coming from. So part of that would be needing to learn programming a little bit, and
Are they in specific languages, Python, C#, whatever?
Not necessarily. You could use any language, but it's every API is a little bit different, and it really depends. There's no standard way of looking at it, but every API has its own is really defined by the manufacturer. Some of them in the old days used to be very complex because they didn't understand that they needed to simplify it for somebody like us to be able to use it a lot. They made it so that it was more for their own use. And then as control systems grew over time, they realized, hey, we need to make this a little bit more user-friendly.
So does it help then coming from the configuration side, starting there? Does that help kind of launch into it, or is it almost different worlds?
As far as learning an API? So the configuration allows you to get there quicker, but you don't necessarily, it doesn't really help you to understand the API.
I agree with Steve there. Is the configuring aspect of it would not be a good place to start to learn and understand this stuff, just because you don't get into the weeds with the configuration, because you don't have that option. You have option A and B. You don't have C, D, E, F, and G.
Right.
So that's where you have to go and hit these other sites and these communities and get into the Pythons or the C# or any language as Steve mentioned, but hitting the APIs, the code-wise.
And a quick way to try and test an API is to use something called a terminal program, where you just type in commands and you send them to the product, and it either does something or it doesn't, and then you could also see what it's reporting back to you. And that's the old way that we used to be able to take an API and be able to test it and see how it works. The other thing that there's really not always guaranteed that an API is going to work the way you expect. So it's very important to be able to get comfortable with it, get in front of the product, and be working with it. And that's again where modules and drivers, these pieces that are pre-developed that you can have confidence in and are proven.
So, other than buying a whole bunch of lunches, what can I do to help support my programmers? What can I gather to do as much front-end work as I can before I try to ask them for something?
I think having somebody who understands and can be a resource to you, and be able to explain what you're looking for, and that's where third-party programmers exist. That's also where maybe you have somebody on your team that's a senior person that can be that gateway or that litmus test to say, hey, this is a product that I'm working with, and here's the documentation for it. Tell me what I need to know. Is this going to be difficult? Is this going to be easy? What's involved? What's the next step?
And to add on to that, what I would say, especially in our world of higher education, is being that go-to person to say, hey, company A, I understand you have an API. Let me have a demo. Give it to my programmer with no time constraints and let them kick the tires. Instead of saying, oh, I got an API, I'm going to throw it on John's desk and I want this done next week. They're not going to understand that. We need that time to test and play and build.
So I think that's probably a good good place for us to pause. We gave a lot of good information today, I hope.
Yep.
This was great. Thank y'all. I learned a lot.
I mean, we love to follow up with the conversation with you and have more, and appreciate you listening, of course. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you're up to, and maybe continue? Maybe there's some feedback that our community can provide for you.
Yeah, I'm reachable on Twitter, Will, the letter R, Dewitt, or at Will R Dewitt, whatever. And yeah, that's probably the easiest way to find me.
Okay, and we'll do it from USC. Thanks for being with us. And
No problem. Thank you.
Brittany DiCesare from Control Concepts. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, LinkedIn and Twitter at Britt Dice. That's
And,
the best way.
Share a little bit about what you do and how you've gotten into this conversation.
Yeah, of course. So ultimately, I help. I go to our manufacturers and just strengthen those relationships, right? So I help them. They come to us and say, API, like we've got it. Okay. How's it getting used? So we help them get those modules and drivers built and into the libraries of the control system, so that on the other side of it, it's easier to use. So I'm really out there talking to manufacturers, building those relationships, and just seeing where those problem areas are so that we can help identify solutions.
Thank you. And of course, James, how can people get in touch with you and share a little bit about what you're up to? And was this a helpful conversation?
I think this was a helpful conversation, not just for Will, I feel, but also myself, like I said, to clear up that miscommunication. I always under the impression API was the middleware, and the drivers were what we consider now APIs. So now I actually learned from here. But first off, I can't go without having Will here. Can't go without mentioning Joe Webb, because now we get him to retweet this. But yeah, you can
get
find
retweets.
Yep. We can find me on anywhere on the internet. Google me, Twitter, LinkedIn, Higher Ed AV, where I write the IT and AV, HEPMA. I'm out there.
Wonderful. And for me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media, and also our company Control Concepts at controlconcepts.net. And we have a blog on there, and we do a lot of writing in the industry, and this is probably a good topic for us to expand upon further, because it's something that we live every day. So, but we do appreciate our audience, and those of you out there. We want to build more community, get more people involved. Thank you, Will, for stepping up and being part of this conversation. But this is what this is all about. James and I really started this so that we can clarify more of these topics, more of these catchwords, to make programming something that's more attainable and more and easier for the industry to understand and digest, and not be afraid of it, quite honestly. And we're also trying to build a lot more of relationships across programmers in different capacities, and that's really what Ask the Programmer came from. So please like, follow, and share episodes, and we like to hear more from our fans. So you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google, as well as YouTube. And that's what we have for today, and this has been Ask the Programmer.